Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of the Imperfect Men's Club podcast. My name is Mark Aylward, and I'm here as always with my good friend, colleague, and co-host Jim Gurley. And another interesting pregame, which is always the case. Jim goes has taken the responsibility for the most part of coming up with the topics that we talk about. But it's always interesting to me, Jim, how we quite often are aligned before we even start talking about what we're thinking about, which is maybe an episode unto itself. But you know, we are both in the world of coaching and advising, agency, teaching, mentoring, whatever you want to call that. And Jim happened upon a recent podcast by a gentleman by the name of Graham Cochran, who I've heard of, but I'm not intimately familiar with. And Jim thought the podcast resonated, and it was around the idea of how does one become a great coach? And we talked about, what is a coach? And we kind of arrived at this idea that the word itself could be teacher, could be mentor, could be advisor, could be consultant, it could be a number of different things. And I know there's a body politic that would argue that those are all very different roles. I would probably disagree. I think it's nuance, but that's my opinion, and I think that the thing that resonated with Jim was the concise nature of how this guy Graham kind of broke down what a great coach is. And he uses basically a formula that he calls the E3 formula, and it's empathy, encouragement, and empowerment. And when Jim and I were talking about it in the pregame, we were both reflecting on how we've used those concepts throughout our lives in various different ways. But I kind of concluded that whoever this person might be that we're aspiring to be this great coach, I think it's helping someone get from where they are to a better place, just in general. And that could be professionally, personally, or otherwise. But it ties in nicely to our flywheel of life because, in our estimation, our humble opinions, you can't really focus on one of those areas, say profession, for instance, without bleeding over into the other four areas. And if you holistically approach it by focusing on one, but keeping in consideration the other four, you're much more likely to be aligned and get from wherever you are to where you'd rather be. So, Jim, I hope I did that justice, but what are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, first of all, like you said, our framework works well with this because in the center of these 5 areas of our life is self-awareness, most important, and then self-agency is one that comes up often.
Hmm.
And in the pregame, we discussed our own individual, say, coaching styles. I appreciate some of the words that you use, an advisor, a teacher, a consultant. Yeah, they're somewhat interchangeable, but uh, I think to get to the next level, the next place in your life, we often look to others in order to develop our self-agency and to develop our opinions. And since we both have consulting businesses and coaching businesses, uh, when I came across this framework, these three E's that he refers to, I valued it a lot because I think what his main point was saying was a really good coach doesn't that does not want the client to depend on them. And that a really good coach gets them to the point where they don't need a coach. And then we talked about even therapy, right? That there's a dependency for people to depend on their therapist even to get to the next week. So I see this often. There's the difference, but yeah, I think what I particularly appreciated was a project that I did last week. This is a company that when I was in Orlando that I'd reconnected with, and they'd asked me over the last year or so if I would do some consulting with them. And I do it occasionally, but I'm pretty selective of who I work with, just because I've learned over the years not everybody is coachable, right?
Hmm.
Not
Hmm.
everybody wants advice. This was a large facility in the San Francisco Bay Area, like close to 80,000 square foot facility. So they had capacity. They were very specific on what they wanted help with. And then I said, yeah, I'll do it using and I have a series of frameworks. So I think I mentioned I use the SOAR framework, which stands for strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and results versus a SWOT analysis. I use that, and then even simple frameworks like unique selling propositions. Those are frameworks that I've used. But then ultimately, uh, they're buying our knowledge, they're buying our experience, and so yeah, let's break these down. I think it's kind of who we are already. You know, just listen to you talk about uh, who you work with over the years. I think this is just part of our innate personalities, but it's definitely worth visiting. And I also want to talk a little about the pregame about how we're both using AI in our consulting businesses. I put together a
Yeah.
proposal that normally would have taken a long time without much detail, or I wouldn't provide that much detail, but I use AI recording so I can record the entire conversation. And not only does it create a transcript, it does a specific bullet point of the action items I want. And it's just remarkable and exciting time that we're in that we could use this technology to even enhance the coaching experience, so the consulting experience. So
Yeah, I think the thing that I've been impressed with, and we did talk about this, is my concern at the beginning of my introduction to I don't know, a year plus ago, was the authenticity issue. Is it going to be my voice? Is it going to be me? I don't want to be fake. Authenticity is one of my
yeah.
the thing I'm most proud of in how I live my life, transparency. And what I've come to discover is that with the proper coaching, ironically, of the AI agent, it can become a replica of who you are. It doesn't eliminate the need for human intervention, but it's a lot more capable than I ever imagined it to be. And one of the things I shared with you, Jim, was that my imagination is broken wide open. I'm no longer limiting what I think it might be able to do. I'm considering what might it not be able to do, And so, yeah, that might be an entire episode, but I think infusing it into the idea of coaching, I think it's a great asset. It's like an assistant coach on some level. But
Well, yeah, and just again to be specific in terms of deliverables in the coaching sessions I've done in the past, it was just a conversation, right? It could have been a conversation over a telephone call or a Zoom call or sometimes in person. But now the deliverables is a recording of the conversation, a transcript, a summary of what we discussed, an action item. All that is done uh, really automatically. And
yeah.
and so the value of the consulting deliverables is way higher than it ever could be before, because that was just not it was not practical to do that. You would have a conversation, it would be over. So
Well,
that's
the other thing that strikes me, and I think might even be even more impactful for you, given the way that your mind works, is you don't have to take notes. You can
yeah,
pay attention. You can
yeah,
all of that energy that was formerly given to jotting down notes and hang on, say that again, say that one more time. It's all of your attention can be afforded to whatever it is you're listening to. And that might be the most valuable piece of all, because
yeah,
if not having to take notes and being able to pay 100% attention probably makes the experience twice as effective, you know?
yeah.
So,
And then, yeah, one last thing to add that. So it's also very customizable. Use the general frameworks, and then, of course, the experience of that I have in that domain. But then when you are able to take those frameworks and then be very specific to their business and a consulting, and then put that together as either one document, I could do an audio of that, an audio transcript. I could also do infographics. It's just a much more valuable product than before.
yeah,
And
it is. I
yeah,
think my opinion is that anybody that's trying to help anybody else leverage AI, don't pay attention to it. It's here to stay, and it's astounding. It's incredible to me, just what I've seen over the last few months. But yeah, so let's to your point, let's break these things down. I'm going to read the first one of the three E's, which is empathy. Empathy involves truly understanding and validating clients' feelings before offering solutions. By listening deeply and reflecting their language, coaches build trust and make clients feel seen and understood. This reminds me of sales, Jim. I think that the reason that we look down on salespeople and perhaps on coaches is this significant percentage of that population that believes the beginning of the conversation is, let me tell you how I can help you. When in fact, the beginning of the conversation should be like, tell me what's going on. Like
Yeah.
give me some context before you assume that you have the solution for me. It's quite a turnoff.
Yeah. 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 Again, I think you and I both did this probably just by nature. However, what he was emphasizing this was that when somebody pays you as a consultant or as a coach, they're really paying you to
Hmm.
listen to them, listen to their pain points. And that's probably more important than even the advice that you give, that they are heard, they are listened to. And often as a consultant, you maybe will initially think that they want us to talk.
Hmm.
And sure, they want us to talk, but they really want it to be understood and to hear their pain points. It's kind of what really I remember you mentioning this. It's how we created the framework with the Imperfect Men's Club. Was was those 5 areas of your life become part of every consulting session, or in your case, job placement or career uh, placement. So yeah, I think anybody that's good at what they do really understands the problem before they give advice, and
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. And
understood.
to add to that, Jim, I would say that absolutely listening is what most people want. But I think that there are, a significant percentage of the student population or the mentee population, whatever you want to call them, doesn't necessarily understand what questions to ask or what topics to bring up. So I think there is a flushing out. Some people do, but most people you have to kind of prod and poke a little bit to say, tell me how you're feeling, tell me what's going on, tell me what we want to, what do you want to talk about? Where are you? Where would you like to be? What's getting in your way? So there's a little bit of context and almost prompting, ironically, talking about AI, prompting
Mhm.
to get them to open up rather than
Mhm.
rely on them to think about, well, what do we want to talk about? Well, let's do that collectively. Let's figure that out
Mhm.
collectively. And then let's agree, yeah, those would be helpful topics to investigate. All right, let's investigate now. And then
Mhm.
listen to their response with all that context. So,
Yeah. Well, and to have empathy, you also have to have life lived experiences that is authentic empathy, not fake, right? Meaning that you have lived those pain points. You have you understand the empathy. It's not just listening, but you've had enough experience where you could feel their pain and then explain it to them in a way that you understand it, and then obviously if as a consultant or then make a recommendation of how to remove that pain point or address those pain points.
I
At the end of the
think the
day, it's really what we're doing, right? We're in search of the pain points to remove them. It's
Yeah, it's funny that it makes me think about when you and I have talked about in on the opposite ends of this spectrum. To me, the empath, the person that's very sensitive to the needs of others and the feelings of others, and I think that that's a very unique person on this end of the spectrum. The other end, and I'm sure there are way too many coaches that have this trait as well, is the narcissist, right? That doesn't have
yeah.
any empathy, that doesn't have any interest in someone else's well-being. They're looking to charge a fee. They're looking to perpetuate the number of hours they get to bill for, and they don't give a shit about you. And I think that both of those coaches exist. And I think maybe the place to be is in the middle somewhere where you do care, but you can get out of your own way. You're not going to get so lost in the empathy that you become unable to help. And on the other
Mhm.
hand, you have to care. You can't just be all about yourself because, most people pick up on that immediately. Those are both very transparent emotional positions in my experience.
Mhm. Another thing I'll throw in before we move on to the next one is the difference between coaching say a business, right? And you've done this, right? Business coaching, so say it's a department or department head and the people there, versus what we're going to offer through the Imperfect Men's Club, and that's individual coaching.
Hmm.
It's very different because if you're working with say a team and he has, say you're dealing with, like in this case I'm dealing with the business owner and he has his team or key um, personnel, which is in this case there's four of them. um, it's also reporting back to him. the pain points his employee. He may not see that his employees, the problems he's having. So
Hmm.
I'd be interested in your thoughts before we move on to the next one about the difference between individual coaching and then business coaching.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I've had a number of conversations over the years where your point of contact is in a position of leadership, but the other people that are involved are on the team and they have perhaps different goals and different aspirations. But what I have always tried to do and recommended that if you're dealing with who's ever at the top of the heap, who's ever cutting the check, who's ever approving the invoice, I want to know from that person, what do you want? How do you want whatever change takes place based on my coaching to impact a particular set of business objectives? Are we addressing turnover? Are we reducing costs? Are we increasing revenue or market share?
Mhm.
Because if I understand what business objective you want to tie to the behavioral change, then everybody can kind of win, right? But
Mhm.
in the absence of that discussion, you're just trying to help people get better, and you got to get lucky to guess right as to what this person might want versus this person might want. And then the
Mhm.
second piece of that is if you want feedback from the individual team about what's going well and what's not going well, or what they want to fix or what they're complaining about, whatever, I'll give that to you, but it's got to be anonymous. I can't violate somebody's confidence or it's not going to work.
Yeah, yeah. This is where I find frameworks being very helpful as a tool, because by a process or a method with a framework, um, you have some structure. You could pull it out of them and then place it in a way that's useful. Otherwise, you just get all over the place.
Yep. Yep. Frameworks are great.
Yeah.
So the next component by Graham's profession is encouragement. And what he
Mhm.
means by encouragement is instilling courage and belief in the client. Coaches should remind clients of their progress, reframe failures as data, and show them what is already working and fostering hope and confidence. Yeah, I mean when you read it out like that, to me it kind of like goes without saying, but I think it is very important because part of what we need to provide our clients is encouragement, is optimism, is hope for the future. And there are a lot of different ways to do that. But I think that the one that jumps out at me here is the reframing of failures as data, learning from mistakes. It's a difficult thing to do. But yeah, this is just another example, Jim, of the advocate, the agent, the coach kind of being outside looking in and observing things that maybe the client is unable to see of him or herself.
Yeah, couple. There's encouragement and there's accountability. Not always accountability in the beginning, but in the beginning of the relationship, you're encouraging them to take actions and do things, or validating their thoughts. Um, so the encouragement is also giving them the confidence that maybe they didn't have without hiring you, that they're you're going in the right direction, or maybe pivoting, or making adjustments that encourage them to take action that if they didn't hire you, they wouldn't have never taken on their own. It's the
Yeah, I think that in my experience with the encouragement piece, it's been for me, it's been more like reminding them of things that are already true. I think we have a
Yep.
tendency as human beings to not give ourselves credit for what we're doing well and to be very critical of what we're not doing well. So sometimes all we're doing in this regard, not all of it, but some of it is reminding them of the successes that they've had, reminding them of the things they've done well, because we just don't do a good job of doing that for ourselves, in my
Mhm.
experience.
Well, and then also they hired you for a reason, so you have to be in a position of authority or credibility of some kind.
Hmm.
I think we underestimate the importance of them before they hire you. Why did they hire you? What have you done, or what have you demonstrated that makes you either an expert or have a perspective that they just can't get from anybody. So, and then there's also the psychology: you value what you pay for.
Hmm.
So by paying for it, that alone makes them value it more than if they didn't pay for it, versus talking to a friend or somebody else. And this,
Yeah,
you know, this we often talk about this about an agent. Everyone needs an agent,
yes.
because an agent is doesn't personalize it as much. An agent sees it for the value to the market, whether that's business or even an agent as a person. Um, and defining your worth, your self-worth, your value to the world, what makes you unique.
Yeah, it's to your point about paying for stuff. I think both of us have discussed and wrestled with this idea of offering a free 30-minute strategy session to kind of get
Yeah.
to know one another. And the no-shows for something like that are like more than 50% because
Is
no
it
one,
really?
there's no
Wow.
skin in the game. It's like,
Yeah.
and it's even though it's disrespectful, it's invisible. It's like criticizing someone on social media. There's no repercussions.
Yeah.
You can be brave and a tough guy. And I've also had a few instances where someone else has purchased my services on behalf of a loved one or a child or a colleague. And half of the time, because that person that's getting the service isn't paying for it, they get much less out of it and they are much less helpful and cooperative during it. So that's a psychological 101 thing. If you pay for something, you're going to pay more attention than if you don't. It's like the kid leaving his bike out when he's a kid and getting it stolen. The first time he buys his own bike, it's locked up in the garage.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the last one is empowerment, and I think this is really really important as well. And the definition that Graham gives here is this focuses on making clients self-sufficient by providing frameworks and tools rather than just direct advice. Coaches should ask powerful questions that lead clients to their own conclusions and clarify next steps, fostering independence and accountability. And this speaks directly to what you were talking about in terms of not being the therapist that people are dependent on, getting them to a point where they can begin to coach themselves and using your frameworks, using your advice, using your structure. But our sessions are over now, but your work is nowhere near done. And I've empowered you to do that work without me, or perhaps with less of me, you know?
Mhm. Focusing on making clients self-sufficient. Help me expand on that one. Self-sufficient as they don't need you anymore. Yeah, I guess that's the uh, what we're talking about. That's what a good coach does. When there's other coaches that do the opposite, they want you to depend on them. So it's more about their business model of dependence, so they can charge more, make more money, and keep them going. I think that's wrong. I really do, that's why I appreciate his messaging about taking this approach.
Well, there's another along the lines of that, and this is a scientifically proven over years and years and thousands of data points that if you teach someone something and that the following day they don't revisit that lesson or they don't practice that step or reinforce that behavior by doing or repeating or reading or watching, they retain approximately 10% of what you taught them, which is astounding. If you within 24 hours be in some level of reinforcement process, like journal every day, do this every day, and they do that over and over, the retention goes from 10% up to like 65 or 70%. It's astonishing. And so that empowerment piece is really not difficult. It's really like just don't stop your progression. Whatever the framework is, whatever the tip is, whatever the technique is, begin the process of reinforcement immediately. And then that independence, that self sufficiency is much more likely. I don't care if it's a diet or a physical regimen or nutrition or professional strategy or tactics, it's all the same. So part of empowering someone is to address that issue of you can't just read the book and then come back in 6 months and expect to retain it all. You have to reinforce it, and that's a very interesting data point that I've seen from a lot of different sources over the last few years.
Yeah. Well, before we wrap up, let's talk about a couple frameworks. Do you have any specific ones that you use, or I
I do.
I
I do.
yeah. So it's,
I have two, but one that I started with that's a little bit more complicated. It's a 7 point reshape. And those that's an acronym that stands for things like rigor and self-sufficiency and so on. But what I've evolved into is a four-letter acronym called REAL, and it's a real framework. And what it stands for is reflect. And we talk about self-reflection a lot, which is the empathy piece of this. It's the beginning of this. Let's reflect on what's going on before we presume we know what's going on. And that's a deep dive into self-reflection. And then the following one is to evaluate. So now that we've reflected on what's going on and who we are and what the challenges are, let's evaluate them. And what I mean by that is let's align them with our values. And in order to align them with our values, we have to really understand what our values are. And in my experience, Jim, most of us think we know what our values are, but when you sit down and go through a rigorous exercise of what they are, you dismiss a few and you add a few. That's been my experience. But the evaluation process is the second step. And then the third step is to activate, which essentially means, all right, what are the action steps that we're going to take? What are the tactics and strategies? What's the plan? What's the action plan? And then, that's a fairly rigorous exercise as well, but it builds confidence. It builds a framework. It builds a plan. It builds structure around the reflection and evaluation process. And then the final piece is two parts. It's leadership. It's lead is the L, but first and foremost is learning how to lead yourself, and that's showing up every day, showing up prepared, with some direction, bringing some skin into the game. And then, building the ability then to lead other people, which to me is mostly leading by example. Fewer words, more listening, less talking, modeling behavior. It's like being a dad. We joke about it all the time. It's like my kids don't do what I say, they do what I do, and I think
Mhm.
people are the same, or that's a human condition. So it's a real simple framework. It really is easy to use, but it addresses, I think, the evolution from self-reflection to leadership. So that's the one that I'm leaning on now. How about
Yeah,
you?
good stuff. You're gonna have a number of them. One that particularly if it's a big vision project, I somewhat created this. I think I'm sure stole parts of it from somebody, but I call it the uh, M5 framework, and it stands for manifesto, methodology, uh, the machine, the mentality, and the mindset. So the manifesto is the vision of the leader. That's the way he sees it. That's the big vision. And then
Hmm.
from there, you move from that vision. That's again the leader. It really is what you have to get people to buy into. And then the methodology is the structure. It's the process. It defines what is needed to accomplish the goals. And then the machine is the day-to-day work. That's the mechanics. It's the methodology that's used that can produce that result. And again, this applies to business, also applies to. I remember when I was playing rugby, I'd have the vision. Hey, we want to be the national champions. Well, how
Hmm.
do you do that? Well, yeah, somebody like at the time I was the captain, or one time I was the president. I had this vision and I had to sell that vision to get people to buy in on it. And then the methodology was, yeah, well, the methodology is we have, X amount of players and talent. How are we going to use that? But the machine was every game. That machine, it just produced a result. And then the last two, and I specifically separated them. There's the mentality. The mentality is a certain type of person. That's a mentality. That means even before you hired them, you probably understand this more than I do, right? It's getting the right people on the team that that may be very different, but they have a similar mentality about how to go about things, about how life works.
Hmm.
And again, you can be a completely different person, but you have a similar mentality. The mindset is a behavior that's something that's created. That's just the environment that you can create, and then you have this mindset to win or to accomplish something. I'll use the example of the Super Bowl winner, the Seattle Seahawks. I have to say, I think I've never seen a team that was so determined that they had a mindset from the first play of the game all the way on that they're going to beat whoever's in front of them. It was a remarkable experience, and I remember watching them play against the. I don't watch a lot of football, but I did watch the two games they played against the San Francisco 49ers. And I just realized this team is going to win the Super Bowl because they have
Yeah.
a certain mentality. But then they also had a head office, and they had a manifesto of how they were going to do it, and then they
Hmm.
had a methodology. So again, this applies to everything. But yeah, the M5 framework I think is one of my favorites because it always seems to ring out. It could also be applied to many things, even your own life, right? But it's
Yeah,
our
most of the
worldview.
stuff, yeah, most of the stuff that works well across multiple
That's
different
right.
landscapes. But yeah, I think,
Yeah.
what we wanted to do was kind of dig into Jim's the podcast he found and this three-pronged empathy, encouragement, empowerment thing. But I think it also afforded us the opportunity for anyone who might be interested to listen to how we think about how
Yeah.
we coach and how we help, because we are, as we've said on previous episodes, we're building out our website and our online presence, and we're going to be building out on the newsletter that we have and the content that we're creating, but also making available services. And it's really, I don't want to speak for Jim, but I think we're both aligned with this notion of helping people, perhaps mostly men because that's our audience, but not necessarily, move from wherever they are, stuck in some capacity, or not satisfied with where they are, knowing they have more potential, and get them to a better place. And that's a broad brush, but hopefully what we just talked about gives you all some insight into how we view the world and how we think about this willingness to help others, interest in helping others.
Yeah. Yeah. The difference also is this is individual high performance coaching, right, versus business coaching. But the framework that we use is what we talk about every week. It's these 5 areas of your life,
Mm-hmm.
which no particular order, but is our careers, our professions. It's our relationship with the world, our worldviews. It's our relationship with ourselves, our mental health, our physical health, a relationship with others, and that's our spouses, our children. Um, so this is all going on in our lives, whether we're aware of it or not. We just use this framework to flush that out to live your best self.
Flywheel, baby.
Yep.
All
All right,
right,
Mark.
Jim. Till
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 next
next
week.
week.
All
Thanks,
right.
man.
Thank you.